I saw plenty of intelligence failures during the war, but I never saw anything like what happened with Mary Chapman. Most people don't know her name. They should. This Iowa farm girl, sitting in a basement telegraph office in London, figured out something that stumped every professional intelligence analyst in the Allied command structure. Chapman arrived in London in March of 1943. 19 years old, 5 feet 2 inches tall, brown hair always pinned back in regulation style. She had volunteered for the Women's Army Corps after her brother died at Guadalcanal. The Army needed telegraph operators who could work fast under pressure. Chapman could process 40 words per minute, which put her in the top 15% of applicants. They assigned her to the Central Telegraph Exchange beneath Whitehall. 24 telegraph machines, constant chatter from across Europe, messages flowing in 8 languages simultaneously. Most operators handled routine communications, supply requests, personnel transfers, weather reports. Chapman drew the night shift, 2,200 hours to 600 hours, when traffic typically slowed to administrative messages. The basement facility stretched 200 feet beneath government buildings. Concrete walls 3 feet thick, designed to withstand direct bomb hits. 26 women worked the telegraph stations during peak hours. Chapman's station was number 18, positioned between the French Resistance Communications Desk and the Norwegian Underground Relay Point. She could hear conversations in 4 languages simultaneously while processing German intercept traffic. Her supervisor was Master Sergeant Helen Morrison, a career Army communications specialist from Pennsylvania who had been running telegraph operations since 1938. Morrison was efficient, demanding, and skeptical of new operators who thought they understood intelligence work after 2 weeks of training. She had seen dozens of young women arrive convinced they would discover crucial enemy secrets. Most lasted 6 months before requesting transfers to less demanding assignments. Chapman started keeping a notebook on her 4th night. Not because anyone told her to. She was bored. German radio traffic came through British intercept stations, encrypted messages that cipher clerks would decode during day shifts. Chapman couldn't read the decoded content, but she could count message volume, how many German transmissions per hour from each sector of the European front. The notebook was a standard-issue military field book, 4 inches by 6 inches, with lined pages. Chapman used pencil because ink was rationed, and pencil marks could be erased if she needed to correct her data. She developed her own shorthand system for tracking transmission sources. AG for Army Group, Corps for Corps level units, Div for divisional communications, timestamps in military format, message volume recorded in 5-minute intervals. After 2 weeks, she noticed something. German message traffic would spike exactly 6 hours and 23 minutes before major offensive operations. Not 6 hours. Not 6.5 hours. Exactly 6 hours and 23 minutes. The pattern held across different sectors, different German units, different times of day. Chapman's mathematical precision came from her background. Her father had been a county agricultural agent in Iowa who taught farmers to track crop yields, weather patterns, and livestock breeding cycles. Chapman had helped him calculate planting schedules, harvest predictions, and feed requirements since she was 12 years old. She approached German radio traffic with the same methodical attention to numerical relationships. Chapman documented this in her notebook for 6 weeks before mentioning it to anyone. She tracked 12 German attacks during April and May of 1943. Every single attack was preceded by increased radio volume at precisely that interval. When she finally showed her data to Sergeant Morrison, her shift supervisor, he told her she was imagining patterns that didn't exist. Morrison had good reason for skepticism. British intelligence employed 400 trained analysts who examined German communications for operational indicators. These professionals had advanced degrees, specialized training, and access to decoded message content. The idea that a 19-year-old farm girl could discover something they had missed seemed impossible. Morrison was wrong. Chapman had discovered the German Army's standard pre-attack communication protocol. 6 hours and 23 minutes allowed sufficient time for final coordination messages, artillery positioning orders, and last-minute tactical adjustments without giving enemies enough warning to respond effectively. German commanders had standardized this timing across all units to maintain operational security while ensuring adequate preparation. The specific timing had been established by German General Staff in 1942, based on extensive analysis of communication requirements for large-scale operations. 6 hours provided minimum time for final orders to reach subordinate units. 23 minutes allowed for transmission delays, message confirmation, and communication equipment adjustments. German commanders followed this protocol religiously because deviation created confusion and operational failures. The problem was convincing anyone that a farm girl from Iowa had outsmarted British intelligence. Chapman's supervisor sent her notebook up the chain of command in June 1943. A colonel in Intelligence Corps reviewed it and filed it away. These patterns were coincidental, he concluded. German radio discipline was too sophisticated for such obvious tells. Colonel James Whitmore of the Intelligence Corps had graduated from Cambridge in 1925 with degrees in German literature and European history. He had worked in military intelligence since 1938 and spoke fluent German, Italian, and French. Whitmore's assessment of Chapman's notebook reflected professional bias against amateur analysis. Trained intelligence officers used sophisticated techniques to examine enemy communications. Pattern recognition based on message volume seemed primitive. Chapman continued tracking message volumes through the summer of 1943. She expanded her data collection to include Italian and Hungarian traffic. The patterns remained consistent. Radio volume increased 6 hours and 23 minutes before enemy attacks, then dropped to normal levels during actual combat operations. She was documenting the entire Axis communication cycle. Italian communications followed a different protocol. Radio traffic increased 4 hours and 47 minutes before Italian operations, reflecting shorter command structures and faster decision-making processes. Hungarian units showed a 3-hour and 15-minute pattern, indicating even more streamlined communication systems. Chapman documented these variations with the same mathematical precision she applied to German traffic. In July 1943, Chapman predicted a German assault against Allied positions in Sicily based on radio traffic analysis. She calculated that German forces would attack at 0630 hours on July 18th. She informed Morrison, who recorded the prediction in her daily report, but took no further action. German forces attacked at 6:34 hours on July 18th, exactly when Chapman had calculated they would. The 4-minute variance intrigued Chapman more than the successful prediction. She studied her data and identified the source of the discrepancy. German commanders had delayed the attack briefly due to morning fog that reduced visibility for artillery spotters. Chapman's system was so accurate that weather delays became measurable variables in her calculations. In August, German forces launched Operation Alaric against Allied positions in Sicily. Chapman's notebook predicted the attack 6 hours and 23 minutes in advance, based solely on radio traffic patterns. She informed Sergeant Morrison, who ignored her prediction. The German assault came exactly when Chapman's data indicated it would. Word of Chapman's accuracy finally reached someone who understood its implications. Colonel David Bruce, head of the Office of Strategic Services London Station, reviewed her notebook in September 1943. Bruce had run intelligence operations in France before the war. He recognized the value of Chapman's mathematical approach to signal analysis. Bruce was a different kind of intelligence officer. Born in Baltimore in 1898, he had worked as a foreign correspondent in Europe during the 1920s before joining the State Department. Bruce understood that valuable intelligence could come from unconventional sources. His background in journalism had taught him to recognize patterns that traditional analysts might overlook. Bruce tested Chapman's system without telling her. He monitored German radio traffic during the third week of September, waiting for the volume spike that Chapman claimed would predict the next attack. On September 22nd at 0437 hours, German message traffic increased by 340% from average nighttime levels. Chapman's formula predicted a German offensive would begin at 1100 hours that same day. Bruce alerted Allied commanders in Italy that German forces would attack the Salerno beachhead at 1100 hours. Most generals dismissed this prediction. Intelligence based on telegraph volume seemed ridiculous, but some units moved reserves into defensive positions anyway. At 10:58 hours, German artillery began a massive bombardment of Allied lines. At 11:03 hours, German infantry and armor attacked exactly where Chapman's traffic analysis had suggested. Allied forces were ready. German commanders had expected surprise. Instead, they encountered prepared positions, pre-sighted artillery, and infantry that had been waiting in ambush positions for 3 hours. The German attack failed within 6 hours. Casualties were 60% lower than previous surprise assaults because Chapman had given commanders time to prepare. The 16th Panzer Division spearheaded the German assault at Salerno. German planners had expected to achieve tactical surprise and break through Allied defensive lines within 2 hours. Instead, they encountered concentrated artillery fire that had been pre-positioned based on Chapman's traffic analysis. The 16th Panzer lost 23 tanks and 400 men in the first hour of combat because Allied forces knew exactly when and where the attack would occur. Bruce formally incorporated Chapman's system into Allied intelligence procedures in October 1943. She received security clearance to access decoded German communications, not to read content, but to correlate message timing with actual operations. Her mathematical precision improved with better data access. Chapman's new security clearance allowed her to work directly with cipher clerks who decoded German messages. She could now correlate specific message types with transmission volume patterns. Artillery coordination messages increased 6 hours and 23 minutes before attacks. Infantry movement orders followed the same pattern. Supply requisitions spiked at the same interval. Chapman was documenting the entire German operational cycle. She identified additional patterns that professional analysts had missed. German radio traffic dropped to 15% below normal levels during active combat operations. Commanders avoided unnecessary communications while their units were engaged. Chapman could predict not only when attacks would begin, but also when they would end based on communication volume recovery to normal levels. Chapman identified the 6-hour and 23-minute pattern because she approached intelligence differently than trained analysts. Professional intelligence officers looked for content, keywords, unit designations, specific plans. Chapman looked for volume, timing, mathematical relationships. She had no preconceptions about what intelligence should look like. Her background helped. Growing up on a farm in Iowa, Chapman had tracked weather patterns, crop cycles, livestock behavior. Farmers survive by recognizing patterns that others miss. Chapman applied agricultural observation skills to military communications. She saw German radio traffic the way she had seen seasonal changes in corn growth, predictable cycles with measurable intervals. Chapman's farming experience taught her to look for mathematical relationships in natural phenomena. Corn yields correlated with rainfall patterns measured over specific time intervals. Livestock breeding success could be predicted based on temperature variations during precise seasonal windows. Chapman applied the same analytical approach to German military communications. Between October 1943 and June 1944, Chapman's system predicted 23 consecutive German attacks with 100% accuracy, not approximately 6 hours and 23 minutes, exactly 6 hours and 23 minutes. German commanders never varied their pre-attack communication schedule. Military doctrine demanded consistency, and consistency created vulnerability. Chapman's success rate was unprecedented in Allied intelligence operations. Traditional intelligence methods achieved 60 to 70% accuracy in predicting enemy operations. Chapman's mathematical approach achieved perfect accuracy over an 8-month period. Her notebook became the most valuable intelligence source in the European theater. If you're wondering how stories like this get buried in classified files instead of history books, you understand why I keep talking about these forgotten pieces of the war. Allied commanders began positioning reserves based on Chapman's predictions during the winter of 1943-44. When German message traffic spiked in a particular sector, Allied forces would quietly move additional artillery, infantry, and armor into that area exactly 6 hours and 23 minutes later. German attacks consistently encountered stronger resistance than intelligence had indicated. General Omar Bradley incorporated Chapman's predictions into operational planning for the 12th Army Group. Bradley's staff would receive Chapman's traffic analysis reports twice daily. When radio volume increased in specific sectors, Bradley would authorize reserve movements without explaining the intelligence source to subordinate commanders. Most division and corps commanders never knew their positioning decisions were based on telegraph volume patterns. Chapman's system worked because German communication security focused on message content, not transmission patterns. German cipher clerks used complex encryption to protect what they were saying. They paid no attention to when they were saying it or how often. Chapman exploited this blind spot. German encryption methods were sophisticated. The Enigma machine created virtually unbreakable codes when used properly. German communication specialists spent enormous resources protecting message content, but they never considered that message timing and volume could reveal operational intentions. Chapman found the vulnerability they had overlooked. The German army never discovered why their surprise attacks kept failing. After-action reports blamed improved Allied reconnaissance, better intelligence networks, or security breaches within German units. German commanders changed attack plans, modified objectives, even replaced officers suspected of leaking information. None of these measures affected Chapman's ability to predict their operations. German intelligence investigated Allied intelligence capabilities extensively during 1944. They suspected agent networks, communication interception, or captured planning documents. German counterintelligence officers never considered that communication volume patterns were revealing their operational intentions. Chapman's method remained invisible to German security analysis. Chapman's most significant success came during the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944. German radio traffic in the Ardennes sector increased by 280% at 1800 hours on December 15th. Chapman's system predicted a major German offensive would begin at 0023 hours on December 16th. Allied intelligence dismissed this prediction because weather conditions made large-scale operations unlikely. Allied meteorologists had predicted severe weather conditions that would ground Allied aircraft and limit visibility for ground operations. Most intelligence analysts concluded that German forces would postpone major operations until weather improved. Chapman's mathematical system indicated otherwise. German radio traffic patterns suggested an attack regardless of weather conditions. Chapman was right. German forces launched Operation Wacht am Rhein at 0030 hours on December 16th, exactly when her mathematics indicated. The 7-minute variance was due to weather delays, not faulty intelligence. Allied commanders who had positioned reserves based on Chapman's warning were able to respond faster than those who ignored it. The 101st Airborne Division received reinforcements at Bastogne, partly because Chapman's traffic analysis had given Allied planners advance warning of German intentions. Units that might have been committed elsewhere remained available for rapid deployment. Chapman's notebook contributed to Allied defensive success during the war's largest German offensive. Chapman tracked German radio traffic throughout the Battle of the Bulge with mathematical precision. She predicted not only the initial attack, but also subsequent German operations during the offensive. German forces launched secondary attacks on December 18th, 20th, and 23rd. Chapman's traffic analysis predicted each attack with the same 6-hour and 23-minute accuracy. Allied artillery commanders used Chapman's predictions to pre-position guns and ammunition. When German radio traffic indicated an impending attack, artillery units would calculate firing solutions in advance. German forces repeatedly encountered artillery barrages that seemed to anticipate their movements. Chapman's intelligence gave Allied gunners time to prepare devastating defensive fires. After Germany surrendered, Chapman was transferred to the Pacific Theater to analyze Japanese communications. But Japanese radio discipline was different. Japanese commanders used different timing protocols, varied their communication schedules, and employed communication methods that Chapman's volume-based system couldn't track effectively. Japanese communication protocols reflected different military culture and organizational structure. Japanese commanders emphasized radio silence during operations. When Japanese forces did communicate, they used brief messages with irregular timing. Chapman's mathematical approach worked against German systematic communication, but failed against Japanese irregular patterns. Chapman spent 3 months in the Pacific attempting to develop new analytical methods for Japanese communications. She identified some patterns in Japanese radio traffic, but nothing approaching the mathematical precision she had achieved with German communications. Japanese operational security was fundamentally different from German procedures. Chapman returned to the United States in August 1945. The War Department offered her a permanent position with the newly created Central Intelligence Agency. She declined. She wanted to finish her education and return to Iowa. The government classified her wartime service at the highest security levels. Chapman couldn't discuss her work for 25 years. The CIA position would have paid $4,200 annually, excellent compensation for 1945. Chapman chose instead to return to Iowa State University on the GI Bill, which paid $75 monthly plus tuition. Financial considerations were less important than personal preferences. Chapman wanted to teach mathematics and live in the rural community where she had grown up. She enrolled at Iowa State University in 1946, studying mathematics and statistics. She married a local farmer in 1948, raised 4 children, and taught high school mathematics for 30 years. Her students knew she had served in the war, but none knew she had predicted German attacks with mathematical precision that professional intelligence analysts couldn't match. Chapman's teaching career was distinguished by her emphasis on pattern recognition and mathematical analysis. She taught her students to look for numerical relationships in everyday phenomena. Her classroom assignments included projects on weather pattern analysis, agricultural yield calculations, and statistical trend identification. Chapman was teaching intelligence analysis techniques without mentioning their wartime applications. Chapman's techniques influenced modern signals intelligence. The National Security Agency adopted pattern recognition methods similar to her volume analysis approach. Military intelligence schools now teach courses on communication pattern analysis that trace their origins to Chapman's handwritten notebook from 1943. NSA analysts study Chapman's methods as part of their training curriculum. Her mathematical approach to signals analysis became the foundation for computer-based traffic analysis systems used during the Cold War. Chapman's notebook techniques were eventually automated and applied to Soviet communication patterns during the 1950s and 1960s. She died in 1987 at age 63. Her obituary in the Des Moines Register mentioned her Army service but provided no details about her intelligence work. The classified nature of her contributions meant that most recognition came decades after her death, when intelligence historians finally gained access to wartime files. Chapman's family learned about her intelligence work only after her death, when declassified documents became available to researchers. Her children had known she worked in communications during the war, but had no idea she had developed one of the most successful intelligence analysis systems in Allied operations. Chapman proved that intelligence analysis didn't require advanced training or sophisticated equipment. It required observation, patience, and the ability to recognize patterns that others overlooked. A farm girl with a notebook accomplished what entire intelligence departments had missed. The German Army's adherence to standard operating procedures created their vulnerability. Military doctrine that emphasized consistency and timing allowed an Iowa telegraph operator to predict their every move. Chapman's success demonstrated that rigid military protocol could become a liability when enemies learned to exploit it. Her story reminds me why I always told my officers to vary their routines, change their schedules, and avoid predictable patterns. The enemy is always watching, always listening, always looking for the mathematical relationships that reveal your intentions. Chapman found Germany's pattern. Someone might find yours. These stories survive in classified archives because the government preferred keeping intelligence methods secret rather than recognizing individual contributions. Chapman's accuracy remained classified long after it could have provided any advantage to potential enemies. Bureaucracy often values secrecy more than historical truth. That's why I'm telling you this now. People like Mary Chapman changed the war's outcome from basement offices and telegraph stations. Their contributions weren't dramatic or obvious, but they were decisive. Remember her name. Remember that intelligence sometimes comes from unexpected sources. And remember that patterns exist everywhere if you know how to look for them. These stories disappear if we don't preserve them. Subscribe to make sure they don't vanish into silence.